What styles are you seeing that, are really popping or you would make in 2025?
Well, right off the bat, sparkling is a great avenue for the no and low market because, for starters, there aren't too many of them out there compared to the still wine options. And in my opinion, most importantly, the actual act of sparkling does wonders for the mouthfeel, especially for the not fully non-alcoholic products, because it kind of gives back some of that sort of like velvety balance and like the weight that you would miss from alcohol.
Hmm.
CO2 bubbles are a great way to get some of that back. And by nature of this being an FDA regulated process, you aren't stuck with the more traditional wine methods of sparkling, whether it be method Champenois or Charmant. You can now do things like inline carbonation shortly after removing the alcohol from your wine when you bottle. So that's a huge avenue that is not terribly saturated at the moment, and your
Hmm.
product is going to taste like the real thing.
This is all about, no and low alcohol, right? This is has been the talk of the town. So really appreciate you coming in, Christian and Adam. We will, really try to bring value to the community by helping them to the next phase of this category, right? We all know that this is growing and this is not stopping anymore. So we just want to contextualize this call on how do established wineries can navigate into this category, understanding that they currently also have their own portfolio to worry about, or maybe a new, new opportunities. If there are any, where can they start? What are the bottlenecks? What are the sort of things that your big buyers are asking, like Targets of the world? So where do you see more inquiries coming in? With that, let's dive into the show. Why don't you folks give a little bit of introduction about each of you? We can start with Christian, and if you can also let us know about BevZero and Wine Hooligans.
Sure thing. So I'm a Cornell microbiology grad. I started my wine career with E&J Gala Winery, where the first 4 years I was in the research chemistry division before switching over to the next 4 years as a production microbiologist. And I actually worked on some of the low alcohol Sauvignon Blanc that's now being produced. Like it's a New Zealand base under the Starborough Starlight label, which is that was sort of how I got my foot in the door at BevZero, where now I do the product development for all new no and low wine-based products and some non-wine-based products.
Super. Adam?
Yeah, hi. I'm Adam Lazarre, and I am the director of winemaking for Wine Hooligans and BevZero. I started my career, um, well, I went to Fresno State University. I got my degree in enology, wine science, and food science, bachelor's degree, a long time ago. And I've been in the wine industry for 30 something years. I work with Christian very closely on developing some of these really cool things. For me as a winemaker, I've been producing regular traditional wines for my entire career. So the opportunity to dive into the non-alcohol and low alcohol world has been, for me, it's been really exciting. It's always about learning and advancing your career and advancing your knowledge of things. And this is a whole new project for me, and it's really kind of re revitalized me, and it's gotten me really excited again. So.
Amazing. I think, as I was saying, I think a lot of winemakers will, sort of get value from you. You both have wore their hat and are wearing their hat, right? So let me ask first question to you, Adam. As a winemaker, how have you seen your role evolving, and what kind of tips do you have for other winemakers? Like, what is, what kind of things are impacting this, this movement of this whole no and low? As a winemaker, what do you feel like? What are you going through, and what have you, decided to, improve on your skills or change or pivot a little bit?
Yeah, it's well, I can tell other winemakers this is nothing like you've ever had to deal with before. Making wine, well, we've been making wine the same way for 5,000 years. It's you ferment grapes and you've got a finished product. You've got alcohol in it. Um, this is another step altogether, and we're dealing with a whole different set of rules and a whole different set of physics and chemistry And so it's almost like going back to school. As a winemaker, if you're being asked to produce this, you can't rely upon your traditional winemaking techniques and skills. Uh, for me, and I think Christian would agree that um, you really need to start with a great product. So as a winemaker, if you're going to be producing this, you have to make a great wine to begin with. It's got to have all the flavors. It's got to have all the balance. There's a lot of things that we look forward to in de-alking wines that is important to have a good finished product. And so you really have to start with a good product, and that's about where it ends. At that point, you have to go back in and relearn everything for the non-alcohol world.
Okay, I mean, Christian, you may want to add in there. So, what do you mean by relearn? Like, what kind of three or four things you really, would tell winemakers to again retouch on?
So I think one of the biggest things that you have to be concerned with in NA winemaking as opposed to traditional winemaking is without the alcohol, you have to be way more careful in all your wine movements and touches. If you want to maybe sweeten up your wine a little bit, you just add grape concentrate to increase the sugar. Well, if you add grape concentrate to non-alcoholic wine, that sugar is going to be eaten up by any yeast and bacteria that are still left because there's no alcohol present. And that cascades out through the entire process, whether it be at bottling, you have to be way cleaner. Maybe it's wine storage. You used to be able to throw it in a chilled tank for several months. I wouldn't recommend holding on to non-alcoholic wine in a tank for a couple weeks. So your timelines are far shorter, your dangers of spoilage are far higher, and all of that then cascades into shelf life. Non-alcoholic wine is not supposed to age in the traditional way that alcoholic wine is. So you need to get this out the door and into your consumer's hand much faster than you normally would with traditional alcoholic wine.
Hmm. Interesting. I think this question, both of you can answer, if possible, because this is the main question, right? Like, what are the opportunities that you see coming into the 2025, or at least for the next couple of years, that sort of wineries can look into and start planning and sort of, if you were to enter to this category, like where would you start, sort of thing?
But it's not a category that's going away. I think I mean, non-alcoholic wines have been around since I think Ariel produced the first one in 1984. They've been around for a long time, but they've only caught fire in the last couple of years. I think uh, even amongst my most conservative marketing and public relations professional friends in the industry, who are usually pretty skeptical about any new things that come along, cans and this and alternative packaging. I don't think anyone believes this is going away at all. So it's a growing category. So the issue becomes if you want to get into it. I mean, if you're really not going to put the money and the time and the research into marketing and figuring out how you're going to compete in what's going to become a rapidly um, congested category, then you should probably just stick with alcoholic wines and not get into it. But if you want to diversify and you think you can do it, there's a lot of research that's going to be involved. You can't just go out and say, I'm going to make a non-alcoholic wine and slap a pretty label on it. There's a lot of different protocols to making it. Therefore, there's a lot of different styles, different ways to approach it. Christian and I have been looking at every different way that we can get into this thing to make the best possible product. And I still think that no one really has identified what quality is in a non-alcoholic wine. Is it
Hmm.
supposed to taste like wine, or is it supposed to be yummy and have all kinds of fun flavors and things? So it's really it's stretching. It's a much bigger category than I think anyone has given any thought to. So as far as opportunity, there's plenty of opportunity, but this is one thing that's going to be expensive. It's a lot more expensive to make non-alcoholic wines than
Hmm.
alcoholic wines. And so you really need to know what you're getting yourself into. For the reason, some of the reasons that Christian mentioned, sanitation all of a sudden becomes super important. With alcohol in your product, you don't have to worry so much because the alcohol kills a lot of stuff. But this stuff is um, it's very susceptible to bad things happening to it. So
I mean, basically, this is a lot of companies are going to use this as a hedging move as well, to be honest, right? Where a lot of mindful drinking is happening. And what if we just don't come back to the old, alcohol consumption levels? So this has to be a little hedge play. This has to be little, people are going to have a little portfolio and start playing with it. I'm pretty bullish about that. So let's go on again, those question of what styles are you seeing that, are really popping or you would make in 2025, what packaging you would make, what price points you would make. If you just can narrow down into those sectors, or, calling it as the opportunity, let's say, once you've decided that you want to go in, what does come to mind?
Well, right off the bat, sparkling is a great avenue for the no and low market because, for starters, there aren't too many of them out there compared to the still wine options. And in my opinion, most importantly, the actual act of sparkling does wonders for the mouthfeel, especially for the not fully non-alcoholic products, because it kind of gives back some of that sort of like velvety balance and like the weight that you would miss from alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
CO2 bubbles are a great way to get some of that back. And by nature of this being an FDA regulated process, you aren't stuck with the more traditional wine methods of sparkling, whether it be method Champenois or Charmant. You can now do things like inline carbonation shortly after removing the alcohol from your wine when you bottle. So that's a huge avenue that is not terribly saturated at the moment, and your
Mm-hmm.
product is going to taste like the real thing.
yeah,
Okay.
we've got
And
and as far as price categories,
mm-hmm.
we have one client in particular who makes a $60 bottle of non-alcoholic Pinot Noir, gets very high scores and is well regarded within the industry. And that just goes to show that this particular person has a contract with some of the most expensive grapes that are out there that are really fantastic. And when you start with great product, I mean, I call it the margarita principle. Your margarita is only going to be as good as the quality of the tequila in there. If you
Mm,
start with garbage tequila, it's going to be a cruddy margarita. If you start with great tequila, it's going to be a great margarita. And so they start with really great grapes. And so for Christian to finish this wine up for this client, it smells and tastes almost like the original thing. And
mm,
it's really so there's going to be all kinds of price categories.
mm.
It's just people have to still
So do,
again
do you think that
convince
people are
people.
moving about $15 range? Like, are they, first it was just like
Yeah.
10 to 15 and that's let me start and play here. But have you seen like people buying $25,
Mhm.
$30 bottles?
Oh yeah, no, they're out there. And for some, I mean, if you're going to make the investment and you're going to buy, six, $7,000 a ton fruit, you're going to have to charge that because your cost of goods is going to cost you
Mm,
10, $12 a bottle to make. So, you're going to have to, if you want to make those margins. And
mm,
restaurants, if you want to get a James Beard Award now in the United States, you actually have to have a lower non-alcohol segment in your wine list. So, yeah, so it's become an important category, and you're going to see all kinds of I think all kinds of different price structures
mm.
predicated upon what it's costing the people to make. So
A different question just popped up. What do you do? Let's say if you end up with a lot of bulk, and you're not able to sell your no and low wine that you just made. Are there any other ways? Like, can you make it alcoholic again and put it back in the mainstream? It's a silly question. I don't know, but again, what do you do? Like when you have a problem with like in the bulk wine, we know what to do, right? There is a spot market, and you move on. And what do you do here?
Fortunately, this problem has not come up yet to any of
Okay.
our clients. Like they have not had issue moving their inventory. That being said, there isn't too much you can do as far as prolonging the shelf life. Like when you
Mm,
open the packaging and kind of like there's no way you can open the packaging and sort of reconstitute the tank or put alcohol back into it. If you would, it would not be economically viable.
okay. Cool. Just thought I would ask. Uh, let's say on the tasting criteria, right? Like you both are pretty much perfect tasters because you make wine, you're technical, you play with labs. So let's on a basic 101, for sommeliers out there, who are buying no and low wines for their restaurants, how do you judge a good no and low wine? Like if you both can just give your basic 101 checklist of nose, tasting, judge. What is a correct benchmark for it?
It's got to taste good.
Okay.
I can't. So I'm this year I'm going to be the a panel chair for non-alcoholic products at the LA International Wine Competition. I've been judging for it's going to be my 19th, 18th or 19th year there, and because I've really embraced the category and the challenges, but I get a chance to sit down with 4 or 5 other professional wine judges, some master sommeliers, master of wines, wine buyers, writers, and no one has an idea yet of exactly
Mm,
what constitutes a good non-alcoholic wine. People are looking, if you are looking for it to taste like a regular wine, you're going to
true.
be sadly disappointed. So it has to have there's different criteria that you look for and characteristics. I think Christian and I both go for balance. We don't want anything too acidic. We don't want anything too sweet. We don't want anything. I mean, again, we're going to be making wine to the customers, what the customer specifications are. There's some people who want it really sweet.
Mm,
But again, there is a pleasurable component to drinking regular wine. Otherwise, we wouldn't be drinking it. And so we want to be able to match that in theory with the non-alcoholic wines. I think restaurants generally, chefs like to have things a little more acid in it because it cuts through fat.
hmm
So for restaurant style wines, I think having a little bit of bubbles on it, which helps elevate some of the acid component, is important. But if I'm sitting at home and I'm drinking and I'm doing detox December this month, so I'm not drinking this month, so I'm gonna have some non-alcoholic wine. I want it to just taste good. I don't want it to leave anything harsh in my mouth. I want it to be balanced. I want to be able to put it down and just say, that's pretty good. It's pleasurable.
Understood. Understood. I think so. Basically, drinkability is what you're looking for, mainly,
For
right?
sure.
Yeah. Let's go on
Yeah,
the
that's
innovation. Maybe Christian, you can take this question first. You have all kind of inquiries that are coming in, and how do you adapt to that profile that your potential customer is asking for? How do you do walk through them in that process? Is there a flavor sort of innovation, reverse engineering process that you do with the potential buyer? Like if you have a case study, that would be great as well. Like let's say, for example, a big chain says that, okay, we want something like this because I think that will just create a new consumer. How do you work from there?
So it starts off with a lot of back and forth with the client because, again, we're trying to make a wine. They know their consumer base. The
Mm,
reason they've come to us is they want a non-alcoholic or low alcohol product that meets their consumer base. So the initial challenge is just trying to tease out their English into actual flavor components or levers we can pull on the back end. So once we've had like substantial back and forth on those meetings, then it kind of dives into a budgetary choice. How
mm,
much money are you willing to spend on fruit? What's your retail price point? What's your packaging look like? These are sort of like the basic questions that need to be answered before we can really dive into the innovation side. But once we're there, once we have an approximate taste profile that we're going for, then we can start sourcing bases. So maybe there's a very specific requirement around the fruit source. Or maybe there's just a very specific requirement on what they want this wine to smell like. And
mm,
then because this is the NA category, all the ingredients you add are going to end up on a nutritional label that is required by law to be on your packaging. That's a huge difference from the alcohol world. So now you're faced with what kind of tools, chemicals, or additives are you comfortable claiming?
mm,
Because like a 4 syllable science word may have a great effect on the wine. Potassium carbonate is a totally normal chemical in winemaking. But when you have to list that out on your back label, now you have people asking, what the heck is potassium carbonate? And why are you
mm.
putting this in my drink? That may or may not care to a certain customer and their consumer base. So these are all the small hurdles that need to be fleshed out way before we get to production. And hopefully we have these answered at
Because this falls in
um,
the food category, that's why it's as good as like food packaging.
exactly. If you are
Okay.
going to go below 7% alcohol in the United States, you are now considered an FDA regulated
Mm,
product. and you are required to have that nutritional panel and label on the back. So sort of like the secrecy of winemaking, there's a much shorter list of
Mm,
additives that you can use in traditional winemaking. So while you have the advantage of a much longer list as approved by the FDA, you must be honest about it, and you
mm.
have to tell your consumers.
So I want to go back on that broader question again, the where it's going, and then we'll continue with the challenges that winemakers face. So I want to know that are consumers getting educated now or choosy that okay, I want a no and low from California versus Oregon, or has it gone to that level, or maybe Spain, or I just want a Merlot no and low or Pinot Noir. Like how deep are we into this?
Well, I don't think we're at the point where people are going to be looking for a Chablis, or people are going to be looking for a Saint-Emilion from Bordeaux that's non-alcohol. I think right now, I think people are just looking to find what tastes good. And
Okay.
what we're finding out is that the Europeans have a jump on us, and they've got some really cool technology over there. So there's some really nice stuff coming in from Germany and France, and Italy, that are pretty good. I think that we're catching up in California, and the nice thing is that a lot of us in the industry are talking to each other. This is what I've always loved about winemaking, is when you move into a community, there's sharing of knowledge. It's the a rising tide lifts all boats. You don't want to be the only producer making good stuff and everyone else is making crud,
Mm,
or people are just going to ignore that entire category altogether. So there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussions. We have the benefit at our place of working with dozens and dozens of other producers. So
sure.
Christian and I both get to see what they're doing and their
Mhm.
experiments are, and we get to talk with their chemists and biochemists and winemakers and stuff. Um, so there is this, but I think that you're starting to see some diversification. People are looking for stuff from Oregon, because Oregon Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris will have a certain flavor. People
Mm.
regional people. I don't know if anyone from New York is going to care if it's a Washington State dealcoholized wine, but people up in Seattle will. So I
So
think
does
that's
wine
about
still
where we're
hold the
at right now.
typicity? Like the New
Pardon?
Zealand Sauvignon, does wine still hold the typicity after this process? Like the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc will still taste like a no and low New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc versus a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc?
It can, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's again, it goes back to the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. If you have a really great New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc with strong aromatics,
Hmm.
we'll be able to capture all of that stuff and put it back into the dealcoholized wine at the end, and it
Okay.
will smell like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
Cool.
If you
So
look
let's
at
go.
some of the older products, you'll notice that they're rather heavily formulated, sort of the older generation of non-alcoholic wines. They have very aggressive smells and flavors because you're allowed to add things like natural
Hmm.
flavorants. And in the earlier days, it seemed like those were pretty heavy-handed. And while they may have tasted desirable, they weren't necessarily wine-like.
Hmm.
Now there's much more of a shift away from using everything in the kitchen sink to kind of build up these products, and instead invest that money in a fruit store that still has a vintage, that still has that sense of place, because that's going to carry through the dealcoholized process. And your consumer base, who are presumably current or former wine drinkers looking to cut back, they remember this sense of name and place. They know these labeling laws and what that means. And
Hmm.
they're absolutely going to notice if you used 9 different fake flavors over investing in a quality fruit source.
Got it. On the
Yeah.
winemaker side, right? What kind of business challenges or problems, you think they're having? And I'm sure you're having conversation with real winemakers. You both are in the middle of the wine country, right? So, be it friends or customers or suppliers, what are some real issues, like, three or four if you can throw in, and so that and what are you advising them on their like questions?
The challenges going into there aren't a whole lot of challenges right now because everyone wants these products. They're clamoring for them. We get requests daily. Our marketing and our sales departments are being asked, can someone produce a good one that we like? And that's really just about it. What's going to happen though is that the floodgates are going to open up, and in the next year or two, the category is going to become so congested that the
True.
competition is going to be fierce, and the people who aren't investing the time and effort into making a better quality product, and again, as Kristen talks about the quality of the fruit, the investing in the fruit, and getting a really, really good base, are going to fall by the wayside. I mean, they might have a really cool label, which
Mm,
is goes a long way. Getting somebody to pick something up off the shelf is 9/10 of the sale. Um, but you have to get them to buy it again. Is the second part. You have to once they open it up and taste it. So I think you're going to see a period in the probably within the next two years, I would say, where you're going to start to see products start to fall away and
mm,
vanish because they just haven't been able to adapt to the quality. We're seeing there's so many advancements in technique, equipment, and protocols. To producing these things right now that it's like the golden age of computers in the early 90s, in Silicon Valley when everything just exploded. But at some point you're going to have a couple of very strong people with great products who are gonna end up staying there, and the small people trying to get into it. Again, it's very expensive, and I think it's going to become prohibitory for small producers to try to get into this category, given that there's equipment involved and other stuff that can be very expensive and techniques that they need to know.
What about the positioning? If I was a winemaker and I had my own brands, and yes, definitely the sales are flat, and we are all going through a tough time. But then, if I come out with my like another product extension of no and low, am I risking my current line? Am I changing my focus? What am I saying? You know, uh, to my own self, like am I now believing into this and not believing into my old origin story? A lot of questions are coming that way as well. That I just had a chat with a Barossa, I think, region head there, and they were saying like, no, we believe that alcohol is good and wine should have alcohol, and that's our belief, right? So some winemakers are like that, but obviously, what do you advise them? Like, where the market is telling something else, but the old beliefs are still there.
I mean, it's no different than when screw caps came out and people
Mm,
automatically assumed anything under a screw cap was garbage. And when cans came out and people started putting stuff in cans, and they figure, well, if you're putting stuff in cans, you can't be a very serious company. Um, again, it's what we are seeing. I'm hearing stories of some really top flight wine consultants who are responsible for some of the most high scoring, expensive wines in the world that are producing non-alcoholic wines. And that's going to help. That's going to be one of
yes.
those things where their input and like I said, the rising tide lifts all boats. Having them out there saying,
Mm,
well, this great winemaker who used to make a Chateau blah 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 blah, and they're here in Napa
mm,
making $800 of bottles of 100 point wine, are making that's going to give us some credibility.
that's
And
true.
so I think it's going to be easier for smaller high-end producers to be taken seriously if these people are getting into it. I welcome. This is a place where I welcome competition wholeheartedly because that's going to help everybody.
Mm. Premiumization, right? Are you seeing? Are you advising, let's say, to go more premium level? Because I'm hearing on one side that everyone's going to play in the $10 to $15 range. You know, uh, so what are your thoughts on that? Are consumers ready for that?
By and large, yes. And part of the reason is, like you just said, if everyone is trying to play in the $10 to $15 range and you can make a product that commands more, you're going to kind of rise above the competition. And because there are relatively few products that are that caliber of wine like, because again, making something that's tasty isn't the challenge. It's making something that's tasty and actually tastes like wine in companion. There's way less of that on the market. So while
Hmm.
that may command a higher price point, you're going to have a much larger share of it because there's less bottles out there that can do it.
Great point.
Got it. Let's talk on some practical ways, which means minimize risk and take the upside, right? Let's say if there was a way like that on how wineries can play this category in the coming years, One of the clear examples I can, let's say, see is if I was a winery, I would go to my distributors or importers and do a pre-sale that, hey, I'm coming out with this one more SKU. Do I have your commitment and blah, 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 or a
Mhm.
retailer and sort of, I would play that simple route of sell, get their commitments and ask you guys to make us a couple of pallets and get the ball rolling, for example. Are there any other smart executional plays that you've seen some wineries did to come into their category at the same time, not affecting their current business and slowly coming into this category?
I think you have to approach it the same way you approach just starting a winery or starting a new brand. You have to start small.
Hmm.
You have to have a distribution path in place. So you got to do your market research. It's important to have commitments. I mean, even more commitments. It's important to have purchase orders in contracts in hand. But understand that when I was consulting as a winemaker, I would often get called to wineries that produce fantastic wines, but they're sitting with 5 or 6 vintages in the warehouse. They never gave thought to how they were going to sell the wine and their distribution path. And so they don't know what to do at this point. I'm like, well, you don't have any options anymore. With this product, as Christian had pointed out, there's not much of a shelf life. It's not like I can sit on a really expensive Napa cab for a couple of years before we figure out how to sell it. You need to have distribution in place. So it's really important to have. So, start small. Don't make any more than you already have commitments for,
Hmm.
because otherwise the stuff is going to, at some point, is not going to be saleable. And so that would be my recommendation for anyone. And I think even the big companies are taking a very conservative approach to this. They're not jumping out there with hundreds of thousands of cases and stuff like that. There's not, I mean, unless you own your own distributorships, you really can't do that. So,
And with that in mind, if you want to be conservative, especially for your first product, I feel like a lot of the discussion is specifically around the non-alcoholic category. Make a low alcohol first. If you already have all your alcoholic wines, for dipping your toe into the space, maybe make a 7 to 9% low alcohol lifestyle brand. That'll give you an idea of what you're in for, the different methods around building up the product, but you don't quite have the, let's say, QC danger or shortened shelf life of a fully non-alcoholic product. So if you maybe are on the fence about one of your own brands, have a few samples of 7 to 9% made up and see if that's still close enough to your original vintage that you would want to further play in this space.
Okay. I think, again, going back on the distribution and scaling your current, let's say this is for the producers who are already in the category, what tips do you have to scale in 2025? Like what kind of retail channels are buying more, which markets, especially when it comes to US, which states are growing for this category? Have you got any other tips on how to sort of monetize and scale? Like if you were to, grow more and get more numbers?
throw more money into it. Yeah, the cool thing about the NA world is that you don't have to go through a lot of the traditional distribution channels. Three-tier system in some states don't apply anymore. I mean, you could get a food service company to sell your products. So you don't necessarily have to go through a wine or a liquor distributorship. Some states have enacted laws that do require that, but you need to be sensitive, because your distributors understand that your retailers and restaurants need and want these products badly. You don't want to alienate your distributors by going to Cisco or one of these big food
Mm.
service companies and saying sell our stuff. So scalability, I think, is really going to be just a matter of what markets you want to get into. And the key is having, you can't be there to personally sell the wine in Texas and Louisiana and New York and Virginia and Minnesota. You need to have people on the ground, some type of distribution network. And in all of my years of winemaking and spending 30 or 40 weeks a year on the road supporting marketing, the people that you really have to sell aren't the retailers or the restaurants. You have to sell your salespeople. Your distributors at some point in the next couple of years are going to have a large book of non-alcoholic products to sell. So now you need to know, you need to convince them why yours is the best and why they need to sell yours and why they need to be focusing on your product over everyone else. Right now, it's so new that distributors like, we'll take it, whatever you have, we'll take it, and
Mm,
they'll run with it. That's not going to be the case in a couple of years. So I think it's going to be important to make sure you focus on selling the people that are going to be selling your product.
hmm.
And once they're behind it and they can go in with enthusiasm and they can show why your stuff is better than everybody else's, it's going to be way more important. It's going to end up being like just the regular wine world before too long.
Okay. I'm just curious again to get your mind on this. Like, I've not seen big plays by Gallows of the world, like the top wine companies building and pushing and mass advertising this, right? For various reasons. Maybe it's their own category which is going to get impacted. But for example, on the flip side, Heineken uh, now is the biggest no and low beer, I assume, right? Like, so they were the first mover. They penetrated well in UK, especially when they built this sort of early mover like that. Like, do you see that, politics is involved or whatever is involved, but why are big brands like Gallo or other huge companies not making a horse brand and becoming a market leader and, building a brand there yet?
They are. For example, oh, remind me,
Like, I just see
Gallo,
small entrepreneurs
yeah,
so
Gallo
far.
has the largest non-alcoholic. Well, they have as far as canned products, but Trinchero, Constellation, all the
Okay.
big conglomerates have big low and non-alcohol brands. I think they're not producing a lot of brands
Hmm.
each of these companies will have dozens and dozens and dozens of wine and alcohol brands or beer brands, but they're really just focusing on one non-alcoholic brand. So when you go to a large supermarket, a Kroger's or an Albertsons, and you see this wall of non-alcoholic wines, it's really controlled by about 4 or 5 companies that have
Hmm.
all of that stuff.
So
So
that was my
they're just not producing a whole bunch, not producing a lot of different brands. So we
cool.
already are. They're smart. I mean, you don't become a conglomerate by being stupid. They're
True.
extremely smart companies, and if they, when they decided to get into this category, they've got millions and millions of dollars into the research and the marketing for it. So they're in there.
Okay. So it's going to be pretty much the same battle that we face with the spirits brands. But like, if I have a vodka brand, I'm competing with Smirnoff and Grey Goose on that retail shelf. It's just impossible to replace that, on the retail. So I think similarly, I mean, if this whole category is just about 4 or 5 SKUs when you're talking retail, it's not much, just like 5 or 6, let's say. And in that, like, if three are owned by Constellation and Gallo, you're just left with a couple of spots, right? So do you see this as a headwind coming soon?
I think one of the cool things is that we've been doing these competitive set tastings where we go out and buy all of these products and taste them, and because it's such a new category and there's so many different protocols and ways to approach this, we're finding, Christian and I are finding that we are not only as good, if not better than everybody else that's out there. And I don't say that lightly because I'm my own biggest critic. I don't like anything I make, but I do like the stuff that we're making in this category. And when we compare ourselves to some of the products that the big companies doing, we're way better.
Mm,
And that's just because we're not yeah, our only orders are just to figure out how to make the best stuff. We don't have to jump through hoops and all kinds of focus groups and constraints within the laboratories and the research to making this stuff. Christian and I can just go in there and experiment all day and figure it out. So
cool.
This ties back to
I think the better
premiumization.
product is going to be the one that wins. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. So that's these big brands are competing at the more the value price point, which for
Mm,
non-alcoholics can be in the mid to high teens. You're not going to be able to beat the margins for value products of conglomerates of this size, but
mm,
you can beat them on quality and flavor. So if you don't necessarily have to compete at that level, you're going to produce a product that's more wine-like. You're then going to capture a market that they're not even playing in.
Got it. I think we'll ask you one final question, recapping it for the 2025 play, right? Like the opportunity. So if you were to make a product extension or a new brand, or coming out with a no and low wine, how would your like each of your brand look like? What will you make? What kind of packaging it will be? What style you would select? What price point you would aim, and what kind of distribution strategy you would like? So let's sum it up that way, because I think that would be a good takeaway for as a blueprint.
Well, that's that. What it comes down to is what our marketing and salespeople. I mean, they're the ones that are closest to. I don't ever assume to know, presume to know what our clients want to drink, or customers in Miami, or the customers in Dallas, or what people like to drink in Seattle or Chicago. So we have people on the ground that are asking for certain things, and then that filters up through our company. And then we have these wonderful meetings, innovation meetings. And again, it's because we're such a small company compared to everything else. It's no harder than just knocking on somebody's door saying, "Hey, what do you want me to make for this next product?" And they're like, "Well, why don't we
So, so,
try this?"
so maybe let me
So,
rephrase it for you, Adam. So you've got 10 customers right now that you're working. You
mhm.
know that couple is like amazing. They're dotting the I's, crossing the T's. I think that this brand is going to be a successful brand, and maybe this one is not going to be, but you're just making obviously as a client. What are the characteristics? What do you see? What do you think that this brand is going to be successful in 2025, and why is that?
I think it's because we have good distribution, and I think we have a better product than most everybody out there. And at the end of the day, the only person that's going to make the decision of whether we're going to be successful is the person who buys it. And so, if that's really what it comes, we're looking at producing a couple of different new items for our brand. We have a brand called Sea Monster, which we're just getting ready to launch, and I'm very excited about it. I think all of us in the company are, and because we were able to do it with minimal amount of work as far as additives and things like that.
Mm,
And it's so new. We're gonna see what kind of sticks and what doesn't stick. We're gonna be very, very in tune with what people want. We know what the most popular brands are out there. We've already got the data from all the grocery store chains. So, it's because it's such an, I mean, everyone knows what a great Chardonnay tastes like, and a
mm.
great deal, and all that, but we're still trying to figure out what people want in a non-alcoholic wine. That's still kind of a
So I
challenge.
think as you giving me some cues, like if I, wouldn't it make sense if I just go with the most popular sort of varietal or sparkling? Let's put sparkling aside. We all know sparkling is a great start, but
Yeah.
apart from that, like I would start with a Chardonnay, a white. I would play with 1520. I would have a traditional bottle which exactly looks like a Chardonnay bottle. So those kind of, at least I'm trying to be, I'm trying to fit in the game as a normal wine, and attacking a broader sort of set of consumers by producing Chardonnay, right? So something like that. Maybe Christian, you think that what would you make, or if you were an entrepreneur coming out with your brand?
So, what I would consider when going into something like this is you're probably right. It's no secret that the white wines are easier to produce to make more wine-like than the red wines. There's a lot of opportunity there, and we're working on it. But say for your first foray into the market, a traditional varietal white wine is probably the most straightforward bet. We have also noticed that similar to the actual alcoholic wine category, there is a major emphasis on the standard varietals. Like you're not going to see many non-alcoholic Viogniers or Carmenères out there because you don't see that many alcoholic Viogniers or Carmenères out there. So while you may be tempted to try a less traditional varietal, for better or worse, this is all going to be market driven, and the wine market wants the classics. So that definitely applies to the non-alcoholic wine market.